A6 and Mercedes E-Class are in a sweet spot between being entry-level and executive sedans, meaning they're both really good flag bearers for their respective brands.
If you're looking for a true luxury car without spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, then these two cars should be on your short list. But let us help you narrow it down.
Executive sedans like this aren't supposed to be too flashy. They're all about being professional and classy. So naturally, these two sedans kind of fall under the radar in terms of their design, and the one you prefer will just depend on whether you want harder lines or softer ones. Being a typical Audi, the A6's design is characterized by very crisp lines and tight proportions and excellent lighting. There is no nonsense in this design, and everything you see here was put for a very specific reason that I'm sure a bunch of German designers use spreadsheets and charts to create. I absolutely love the LED headlights up front and the animated LED turn signals, and this is probably the thing that stands out most about the Audi's design. The Mercedes design is much softer all around, with almost no hard creases to be found. I kind of find the E-Class's design to be more elegant, but I do prefer the louder statement the Audi makes. The E-Class only came out a few years ago, but it's already starting to blend in.
Under the hood of the Audi is a 3-liter turbocharged V6 engine that makes 335 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque. Now that's paired to a 48-volt mild hybrid system, a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission, and Audi's Quattro all-wheel drive system. It earns 25 miles per gallon combined and can hit highway speeds in 5.1 seconds. Now this Mercedes doesn't have a mild hybrid system or a dual-clutch transmission. Its 3-liter turbocharged engine makes more horsepower but more or less the same torque. It's paired to a 9-speed automatic transmission and Mercedes' famous 4MATIC all-wheel drive system. It's slightly less fuel efficient, but is a little bit faster to highway speeds, getting to 60 in 5 seconds flat.
Now this is an Audi, and it wouldn't be an Audi unless it had one of the most impressively put together interiors ever. When you get into the A6, you can really tell that it sets a very high benchmark for this segment. And not only is everything you can touch very luxurious, but the cabin is also very high tech, and it has a lot of impressive features that will impress your friends. You'll notice that there are barely any buttons in here. Instead, Audi uses 2 touchscreens, and normally I hate a 2 touchscreen setup, but the way Audi has done it in here makes a lot of sense, so it ends up being very intuitive. I still prefer having real buttons to use, but I do prefer this setup to Audi's old MMI system that used a knob to control everything. The screens are responsive and the menus make sense, which is great because it doesn't make it too distracting to use. The one downside is that it collects fingerprints and it looks so dirty. Another highlight is the virtual cockpit, which looks so fancy. Drivers can customize it so that you can focus on navigation or media or the gauges. I also really like the different driving modes, and they work together with the optional air suspension to cater to your driving style. If you want smooth cruising and a softer ride, or even better handling, it can do both.
Now the cabin of the Mercedes is well suited for people who don't like a lot of change. You see, this is a really familiar looking cabin, and there's no really high-tech stuff like you find in the Audi. You see, there's normal buttons and toggle switches here, and this doesn't yet come with Mercedes' MBUX infotainment system. So you get this weird touchpad, and you control everything with this rotary dial, which sums up just how dated this cabin is. On the plus side, you do get Android Auto and Apple CarPlay support. Can you really call this car old school when you've got these 2 giant screens? I actually like the digital gauge cluster, but it just doesn't compare to Audi's virtual cockpit. Still, I find the layout of this car pretty classy. It makes me think that this is the sort of car that would park in a garage with many leather-bound books. Buyers will really appreciate features like the wireless phone charger, but what really sells is safety. Now, Mercedes has a bunch of technologies that help prevent the car from getting in an accident in the first place, but there's also features that make sure you stay safe in the case of an unavoidable accident. You see, this car actually moves passengers in order to mitigate injuries, and even has a special whistle to prevent hearing loss if you do get in an accident, and that's very impressive.
So we're in the Audi A6 now, and it shouldn't be a surprise to you, but the A6 just drives so remarkably well that all other cars in comparison seem kind of janky. Everything just comes together so cohesively. The steering, the suspension, the handling, it all comes together to deliver a really well-sorted drive. If there's one weirdness to note about the A6's driving dynamics, it's the steering, and it's really good. It has four-wheel steering and a variable ratio rack, and when you put both of them together, it can kind of act weird sometimes. So you can be in the middle of a turn and then the behavior will kind of change. So it can feel inconsistent, and it's not even a negative, it's just something to take note of. Despite that weirdness, I still really love the steering setup because it allows you to do really tight turns in parking garages, and you can do U-turns like it's nobody's business. So Sammy already mentioned that the A6 has a 48-volt mild hybrid system. That has a lot of benefits. One of those is really quick acceleration. So instead of waiting for a turbo to spool up, the acceleration feels a lot more instantaneous, and it just keeps going and going. And what helps that is the DCT. This 7-speed dual clutch transmission is probably one of the best transmissions out there. It is so smooth and it shifts so imperceptibly that you can barely notice it working. So one of the other benefits of that mild hybrid system, besides the obvious better fuel economy, is it allows for a very smooth stop-start system. So in other cars, I usually just end up turning it off because it's so jarring. But in the A6, it's so smooth, you can barely notice it's there. All of that said, the A6 is just so remarkably good. It is crazy how good this car is. I mean, it's almost perfect, but it doesn't hide the fact that it is a little bit boring. And even the E-Class is a very serious car, and no one expects either of these sedans to be sports cars. But if you were looking for something more fun with more personality, these probably aren't the right cars for you.
Now that we're in the E-Class, I can tell you that I love driving this car because it feels exactly like a little S-Class. You know, it's a tiny bit smaller, yes, and it feels really versatile and high-end, but without all of the excessiveness of an S-Class. I really think this car is a fantastic daily driver, and you can actually still have some fun with it, too. It is worth pointing out, though, that this engine is a little bit dated compared to what other Mercedes have, and especially dated in comparison to that Audi. You see, this is a normal turbocharged V6 engine, and it's not that fancy new inline six that you get in the E53. In fact, I think that this 3-liter V6 doesn't have much of a future left in the E-Class. I think it's going to be replaced by that newer inline six with EQ boost technology. Now, this has none of that mild hybrid stuff that the Audi has, but it's still very smooth, and it has a ton more power than the Audi. Now, this 9-speed automatic is a little bit slower than the Audi. In fact, very few things can compare with an Audi dual clutch transmission, maybe a Porsche PDK. And as a result, the E-Class feels much less sporty than the Audi. So that means that the E-Class is less fuel efficient even though it has more gears, and it also feels just less agile. In a way, that's what makes the E-Class feel like an S-Class. It feels old world and stately, while the A6 feels really new school. What I like about this E-Class is that it's offered with air suspension, which is what our car has here today. And that will raise and lower the car as needed depending on your drive mode, and even when you hit highway speeds, it'll lower the car to become more aerodynamic. It also offers a fantastic driving experience. This car is very smooth on the road. What's cool about this air suspension is that it's very versatile, and you can pair it with an individual drive mode. So that means you can put the suspension in the sport setting and pair that to a light steering feel, or the other way around if you see fit. When it comes right down to it, this E-Class just feels less sophisticated when compared to the A6. And that's actually saying something because this E-Class is still pretty good. But the A6 just has more features. It feels more special. And when you buy a luxury car, that's what you want to feel. You want to feel like you're getting something that's worth all of that money. If anything, this E-Class feels just a little bit more familiar. I think it's easier to get in this car and get up to speed with it in comparison to the A6, where you have to get to know that new touchscreen and all of these fake buttons. I feel like my folks or an older generation can really just jump in this car and get ready right away, while the A6 will probably be more appealing to a younger generation. Both of these cars borrow from the best within their own lineups. You can clearly see the influence of the A8 and the S-Class in this A6 and E-Class.
But the A6 really offers a more modern and fully featured luxury experience. So with its efficient new powertrain, that beautiful interior, and those great driving dynamics, the A6 is our clear winner. Bye forever, bitches!